Let's make a start. Lesson 20, inheritance. Now, this is a pretty chunky learning goal. We've got a, and this is again another lesson that it took me a while because I had to learn. I'd learned these terms before, but it had been a long time since I've learned them, so I had to relearn some of these terms. But we were able to describe how and why some traits are passed on from an old generation onto a new generation or a new one. We're going to describe what the word inheritance means. We're going to describe why certain traits get passed on from one generation to the next. What we did last time, jumping backwards, is we talked about, on Friday, we talked about two big cell division types. The first one we talked about was mitosis. Mitosis being the splitting up for repair and growth. We said that what happens is a cell copies all the DNA, sends half the DNA to the left, half the DNA to the right, half the copies to the left, half the copies to the right, and then they form two identical cells. This works by, how do you copy the DNA? Well, if you just split them apart, you can just push some new bases in. So if we split this apart, we can move some bases in and eventually just copy the whole thing. How does this look? Well, here are 46 chromosomes. What happens is if you take them, they're in groups of 2, and if you copy them all, then you get 2 copies. What then happens is that in each of those copies, one half gets sent to the right, one half gets sent to the left, and then you end up with 2 new cells. Perfect. Meiosis is very similar. The only difference with meiosis is that we're not doing it for copying cells. We're actually doing it to make smaller, randomized gene packets, which are going to be used to pass DNA on from one generation to the next. This is how we use it in sexual reproduction. How does it work? Well, first thing you do, you take your pair, group of 2, you swap some bits and pieces. After you've done some swaps and bits and pieces, that's like shuffling the deck once, then what we do is we split the deck randomly. How do you split the deck randomly? Well, first, we copy everything. Then we split the copies, just like in mitosis, and then we split those copies again. So now we have four packs. But the problem is that you don't know what's going to be in those 4 packs, because not only have they been split from each pair has been split. So that means 1 has been split from 2, 3 has been split from 4, 5 has been split from 6. And you don't know whether they went up or down. And so therefore you end up with 23 chromosomes in each. And they are random cells. We call these random cells gametes. And then they're used as egg cells or sperm cells. The advantage is, though, is that when these cells meet another an egg cell, or if these are sperms, if they're egg cells, when they meet a sperm cell, when they get fertilized, it's going to be a completely random copy. So that sort of explains why when you have children, it's very unlikely that children are going to be look exactly the same as you. And that's why they're just so diverse. Even just with one person, you can have 2 to the power 8 million different types of gametes, 8 million different types of sperm cell, 8 million different, and that's even excluding the whole shuffling of the DNA at the start. There are, of course, twins, where it's a little bit of an exception, but twins are caused when, some weird splitting happens, or, for example, 2 eggs get fertilized at once. So today what we're going to talk about is, I guess a little bit got to do with that idea that we've been discussing, is that, okay, we've talked a bit about, gametes being like sperm cell and egg cell meet, and then they form and they make, fertilization happens, and that's how you get a baby. But here's the real question: is, well, where does this come from? Like, where does
Wait,
this?
so
Yo,
I think that's the wrong past
what's the wrong past?
in the learning goal.
We will. Yeah, you're right. You're right. You're right. That is the wrong past. Sorry, I wrote this very, very quickly before the. Yeah, thanks for that. Because yeah, essentially what we're doing is we're discussing how it gets moved from one person to another. So we're going to talk about how they get passed from one person to the next. And I guess to start off by talking about that, we need to talk about what this word inheritance means. Now, inheritance is when something is passed, so you're going to write here, passed down from your biological parents to you. In financial terms, this is money passed on when they die. This is actually something that I don't know, just so that you know the word inheritance isn't you. The word inheritance is usually like, oh, I'm gonna get my inheritance. It means that, oh, my grandparents or parents died and then they leave me all their money. That's what inheritance is. But of course, in genetic sense, it's a little bit different. In genetic terms, it's the genes, traits, characteristics you gain from sharing some DNA with each parent. What does this mean? Well, this is the classic thing of if you've got this is the classic thing of when people look at babies and they go, oh, look, you know, if you've got a baby, you know, let's just, I don't know. You've got a baby and you go, oh, wow, that baby looks just like his dad. And you're like, well, what do you mean the baby looks just like the dad? And so you go, well, what does the dad look like? And you go, well, obviously they both have the same nose. And so when you say, sorry for my bad drawing here. So when you go, okay, well, that doesn't why does that happen? You know, people often say, you have your dad's eyes or you have your dad's nose. I was like, man, you've got your mother's eyes or your mother's ears. I don't know. I always hear different things with babies.
Wait, so
Yeah.
have you heard like you've got your uncles or aunties like features?
Yeah. So I have heard that too, and that's the same sort of idea as well, right? If you think about it, sure, you won't be getting any DNA from your auntie or uncle unless your mum did something, you know, that she should have done. But you won't have any, you won't really get any DNA directly from your auntie and uncle. But you might have some DNA from your grandmother or grandfather that got passed to you that also got passed to your uncle. And then because of that, you know, you share the same trait. So you might have like, I don't know, you might have like a weird eye that is a little bit hot off center or something. It's like, well, that's the same sort of thing that Uncle Jerry had. And it's like, well, look at that. Did you know that Uncle Jerry had the same you have shared DNA. Now, it's also the other point, of course, here is it's unlikely that you're going to have traits that are with someone outside of your family. So if you go to your friend and you go, wow, holy crap, you've got like dark skin. It's like, I have really pale skin. It's like, yeah, it's probably because you have different genes because you came from different parents. You might look at your friend and say, you're so tall. It's like, yeah, it's because you come from you got different genes. So, and I've referred to these things as traits. So what a trait is or a characteristic, is like it's an observable fact. So when I'm talking about observable fact, I'm talking about, oh, you can tell this from this person or something like that. Min asked a question on chat, can disease be inherited? And the answer is yes, that's what a genetic disease is. I think if you look at Huntington's. So Huntington's disease is a genetic disease that if you I think you start to get shakes and tremors in your body and then you can't control them, and that gets passed down from generation to generation. Color blindness is another genetic disease, and like that gets passed down from generation to generation. Color blindness is the reason I drew up color blindness out of all of them is one of the interesting things is my brother is colorblind, but I'm not colorblind. I'm like, okay. And my grandfather is colorblind, but I'm not colorblind. So that's where the genes come from. It's kind of interesting. My brother was very sad when he found out he's colorblind because he actually wanted to join the army, but they said, well, we can't let you in because you're colorblind. And I was like, oh, okay. Another one, of course, is we'll go with breast cancer. A lot of breast cancer is genetic controlled. So if you had breast cancer, if you're a woman, or a man, I suppose, you have breast cancer, it's makes it more likely that your generations after you, they will inherit the chance for breast cancer. Of course, inheritance isn't always bad. I guess I'm talking a little bit more about this than I need to. Inheritance isn't always bad if you manage to if your father is really tall, then you might be really, really tall, which might be really good for you if you're going to be playing basketball. And of course, this same thing happens in the animal kingdom as well. If you're a giraffe and you've got a really, really long neck, and then your children will also then have really long necks. And if they have really long necks, then they're more likely to have children with really long necks. And that trait can get passed on from generation to generation. And that's sort of how evolution works. We're not going to discuss evolution in this genetics topic. I think we might talk about it later on. But yeah, it's kind of genetics. Inheritance is kind of like passing on traits. Evolution is a little bit more complicated because why do certain traits get passed on when why do certain traits exist in a population where other traits don't? But yeah, we'll just quickly talk about the fact that it's passing on sometimes good things, sometimes bad things, but it's just like ultimately you'll have the same sort of thing as your parents. So let's talk about, yep.
So does that mean if like no one in your family has the genes of like, say for example, color blindness, like you said, would it be possible for you to become colorblind even without the genes?
No, it's not really. Well, that's the thing. Yeah, it's not really possible for you to become. I mean, like, there could be something happen to you. Like, there could be some environmental accident where maybe you go blind because you get like a strong light shone in your eyes or something. So that is possible from environmental, but it's unlikely. But there are some things that lie dormant in our DNA, asleep, and you won't know that they're in your DNA, and they might go from generation to generation, and then you will like find out. Then like a couple of generations time, it'll show up, and you'll be like, "Oh, I didn't even know that." So you could have a child that was born colorblind. You're like, wow, how the heck? We don't have any color blindness. But then it turns out that your great grandfather was colorblind, and it's just been hiding in your it's been hiding in the genetic code of your family for so many years that you might not notice it's there. Some of your traits, maybe you've got like, maybe your elbow is double jointed or something. Like, well, that's rare, but that did show up in our family like 3 or 4 generations ago, So sometimes things will hide in your DNA. Okay, so next up is, I guess, this big question. Well, not this big question. Well, let's talk about this new word here called genotype. Now, a genotype is the particular set of genes in your DNA that make you unique. Now, we've talked about what genes are. Genes are the specific instructions that make particular proteins. So we've talked about them already. We said that it's a big long list of instructions that go to make a particular protein. So, and then those particular proteins will then go to make particular structures. So therefore, your genes are what make you unique. How much, I don't know, depends on how much of the protein melanin your body makes will control how dark your skin is. So if you have genes in your body that say, hey, make a lot of melanin, then you will come out, your skin will be a lot darker than someone else that says where their genes don't do that. So this is kind of a way, your genotype is what makes you unique. It is, of course, the information given to you by your parents. That's where you get your genotype from. Ultimately, you are unique because you are a mixture, you're a random mixture of your parents' DNA. Your siblings are also random mixtures of your parents' DNA, but because I said a random mixture, they're completely different. They share some similar qualities, but ultimately they are still very different. So genotype is almost like the fingerprint of your DNA, the part that makes you unique. And I've got a little, the reason I'm talking about genotype is because we're going to be using this word a lot. When I talk about, oh, this person's genotype has this, it means that according to their DNA, what makes them unique is this factor. So that's where I'm going to come up with this word a lot. I'm going to change the slide. Are we cool if I do that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. So how do we use genotype? So a genotype is one half of an equation. If you take a genotype and you take your environment, you can bring those two things together to get something called a phenotype. Now, a phenotype is an observable or chemical characteristic of an individual. And I always got this a bit confused. Well, to be honest with you, I only learned this word. I'd heard about it before, but I only properly understood this word last night. So yeah, I'm learning this at the same rate that you guys are. A phenotype is, so here are some examples of phenotype: skin color, height, weight, hormone levels, hair color. All of these are phenotypes. And because a phenotype is it's an observable or physical or chemical sometimes as well. So when I talk about hormone levels, I'm talking about chemicals in your body. Might be, and these are controlled by, these are the things you see. So when I was talking about your uncle's weird, your uncle's weird chin, you've got your uncle's chin, that would be a phenotype. That would be something that you can observe. It might be connected to your genotype, but yeah, the word phenotype is, it's a trait that's governed by these things. Just one sec, while I copy this down. So now all of these traits also include they're not just based on your DNA. They're not just based on your DNA, they're also based on your environment. Now, when I say environment, I'm talking about what things you do in your life. What things you do, what things happen to you in your life, where you live in the world, what you eat, with how much you exercise. All of these things will control your all of these things will control a lot of different parts of your world, and therefore they will control a lot of these different aspects down the bottom. those aspects down the bottom, for example, weight, height, they're not just controlled by your genes, they're also controlled by your environment. And we're going to look at an example in a second about how a particular one of these, we can choose any of them, but I'm going to choose one in particular, how it can be governed by both of these two types of things. Now, I'm going to warn you, I feel like I should look up whether or not, I think there are some traits that are only governed by genotype. So there are some traits that it doesn't matter what your environment is, you're going to have this trait. But I didn't do enough research. So I'm sorry about that, ladies and gents. I really should have looked that up, but I'm pretty sure, thanks, Alethea. I just wanted to make sure that you understood what the word phenotype was, but I think there might be, like, for example, we're going to talk about a particular genetic trait, which I don't think is a phenotype. So we'll talk about that later on. But I want to choose one of these. We're going to choose weight. I want to look at weight for a little bit. So if I look at weight, right? Your weight is affected by your genes. Families with overweight people will have children who tend to be overweight. And that's, you may or may not have seen that, but you'll see, you'll see overweight people will tend to also have, will tend to have overweight babies. Now that's, it's kind of a fact. And so you sometimes, do you ever feel really, really bad about your weight? You're like, oh my God, I'm so big. And one, you should never feel negative about your body image, because ultimately it doesn't matter. You're beautiful no matter what. That goes for everyone here. But if you do, sometimes you can think of, well, if your parents are big and overweight, then it's probably, some of it's a little bit caused by them, by their genes. Maybe their genes just mean that it's harder for them to lose weight. You might have the opposite condition. You might be like, I am really, really stick thin. And you might look at your parents and they're also really, really stick thin. And you can be like, I eat Hungry Jacks all the time. How come, like, I'm not big and fat, I'm just still a stick thin. I can't, like, lift muscles, or I can't get muscles. It's like, well, that's probably because of your genetics. Genetics are a weird thing. There's like, sometimes I'm always like, okay, like, it always annoys me how, like, I put on a lot of weight whenever I go out and eat, like, KFC. But I look at friends of mine that are older than me, but it's just got better DNA, so they just burn it off. It's like, all right. So some of your weight is governed by genetics, but your environment also affects your weight as well. Okay. How does the environment affect your weight? Well, if you go and you eat lots and lots of, if you go and you have a bad diet, you eat KFC all the time, and then you don't exercise, you are going to put on weight. It doesn't matter if you've got, and the opposite is true as well. If you live in unfortunately a poor country where you don't have much access to food or water, it doesn't matter if you've got really, really chubby person genes. If you've got no food or no water, you're going to be thin no matter what. It's sort of, and these same things occur for the other ones. Height is an example. You might have really, really, really tall parents, but if you don't eat properly, then you'll never be able to access those genes and get to that height. So it's kind of like, when you look at those particular traits, they're governed by more than one thing. Some of them might be, environment might be what you eat. Some of them might be how hot it is. Some of the environment things might be like, yeah, like it might be how old you are. So it might be like, okay, like I'm sure your genes say that you will, like your genes say that you'll have lots of hair, but you know, or but you might have this thing is like, well, I'm really old now, so I'm losing my hair. Baldness is definitely one, and of course, hair is one as well. Like obviously, if you don't take care of your hair, then your hair might change, but you know, you're probably more likely to have your parents' hair. I look at my hair and I think I've definitely got my father's hair, and he's got his grandfather's hair. It's all curly and out of control. And you probably know that you probably look at your own hair and be like, yeah, it's pretty similar to my parents' hair. So here's the question. Why do we get certain traits? Okay. Why is it that, you know, why is it that I have my father's hair? Why don't I have my mother's hair? You might say, oh, well, it's because some of you guys might say, well, it's because you're a boy, you know, a son, but you can't have your mum's hair because mum's a woman. But it's like, if I look at my wife, she's got her father's hair. He had black, crazy, out of control hair, and she has black, crazy, out of control hair. Why didn't she get her mother's hair? I look at my sister-in-law, my wife's sister. She has her mother's hair. Why? Why do we end up with the traits that we do? My eyes are blue. My mum's eyes are blue. My dad's eyes are brown. Why did I end up with blue eyes and not brown eyes? Those questions, how we end up with the traits that we get, form the field of genetics. That is what genetics is. Why do certain traits show up? We're going to explore some of the basics. And obviously, as we explore these basics, a couple of things I want you to pay attention to. What I'm going to talk to you guys about is so much more complicated than what we're going to do here. And I think that they do this a lot. We do this a lot, but obviously I'm just going to be giving you guys the basics here. Why I'm giving you guys the basics is so that when you guys maybe read a news article, if you never do biology again, you can be like, oh yeah, I know what this is. When you guys have children, you can be like, I can tell you why they have these traits. But ultimately, the big thing is you could really explore this and get really deep into this. But I find some of this stuff really interesting. So how do we get these traits? Well, obviously, some of them come from dad and some of them come from mom. Okay. We know that when we get our DNA from when we are when your first cell ever existed, it existed because of fertilization. It came because what happened was we ended up with 23 chromosomes from dad, 23 chromosomes from mom. And those 23 chromosomes came together to bring us 46 chromosomes. Done this already. Of those 46 chromosomes, each of them have a pair. One of these pairs comes from mom, and one of these pairs comes from dad. We've done this a few times already. And we're going to do something we've done before as well. We're actually going to look at one of these chromosomes. Let's grab a look at this chromosome here. Okay. Now, we've done this already. One chromosome comes from mom, the other dad. Okay. So so far that's so good, right? We even color code them to be pink and blue. You know, one from dad, one from mom. Doesn't matter though. Now, there are a few genes on this chromosome that code for a particular trait. Let's just take let's just say that these sections here. So in these sections, if you don't understand, in these sections of the chromosome, there is a piece of DNA, and that piece of DNA will be like a G, A, T, A, C, you know, whatever it is. That'll be a piece of DNA that codes for a particular trait. So that particular trait might be you have black hair. This GATAC tells your cells make black hair. These parts might be like, yeah, no, make sure it's this type of black, make sure it's this curly or whatever. But ultimately, all of these genes will code for, maybe they might code for one trait. Now, as for traits, though, we've got to be careful. There are so many different variations. I always like to use hair color as an example. You can use any of these as an example, but like, for example, hair color. You could have black hair, you could have blonde hair, you could have brunette hair, you could have ginger, you could have brown, you could have like sandy blonde, you could have like dirty blonde, you could have black with streaks of brown in it. You know, I'm just making some of these up as I go, guys. I don't know, but these are the main types, obviously. But yeah, you're going to end up with there are so many different types of there's so many different types of ways that these genes could work. And I've used a weird word here. This is the wrong word to use, but I actually think that for some of you guys, it's like, oh yeah, it makes sense. Each flavor of a trait is called an allele. Okay, so each of these, black is an allele, blonde is an allele, brunette is an allele. They're all different alleles for the same trait. And the reason I've used the word flavor is because I'm like, well, think about it, right? If I go to you, I want to get ice cream. And you go, well, and you go, okay, fine. Well, what ice cream do you want? I might say, I want chocolate ice cream, you know? But I could easily say, I want vanilla ice cream. I want strawberry ice cream. They're still ice cream. It's still still a frozen good. It's still, that's the trait, is ice cream. It's just there are different flavors, different types of that trait. I could even just say something completely different. It's like, I don't want ice cream, I want gelati. Gelati has different flavors. And so, you should just, yeah, that's my point. Multiple genes can code for one trait. So don't just think that it's like, oh, one gene. Don't just think it's like one gene codes for, you know, eye color. You know, one gene codes for skin color. You could have like, you know, 20 genes coding for eye color, or 25 genes coding for skin color. You might have one gene for some things, but usually there'll be just a mixture, like a couple of genes. And to be honest with you, this is the part of genetics research we haven't quite figured out yet. We haven't quite figured out for a lot of DNA, why some genes, you know, work really well, why some genes control. We sometimes think it's like, oh, we completely understand why some genes do things, but we don't understand everything. So for example, there's been a lot of research into breast cancer, and they've identified certain genes which lead to breast cancer, but they don't always lead to breast cancer. And then there might be other genes that also control breast cancer. You know, we just don't know enough. We have some basic ideas. We mapped the human genome, so we have some basic ideas of what genes do, but we just don't fully know everything about them. I'm going to change the slide. Is that cool? Cool. So let's take these two alleles, and I'm going to talk about one particular trait. Okay. Let's say these alleles. Let's just say these parts of the DNA. Let's say this allele codes for earlobes, earlobe attachment. Now, when you have your earlobes, and I'm sure some of you guys are probably fiddling with your earlobes right now, either your earlobe is detached and free to move in the breeze, or it is attached to the side of your head. So it's either detached or attached. Let me show you a picture. So the one on the left, this is someone that has their earlobe attached. And this one on the right is someone that has the earlobe detached. I'm going to call this uppercase D. Now, I chose this particular allele to investigate because there's only two possibilities. There's only two flavors of this. There's only two flavors of this trait. Either it's attached or not attached. They're the only two possibilities. So when you look at your parents, right, when they gave you their DNA, they either gave you code to tell you to make your earlobes detached or make your earlobes attached, you know? And that, let's just say it's these. So your mother's DNA may say one thing, but your father's DNA may say a different thing. Okay? Your father's DNA at these particular parts might tell your earlobe, yeah, you've got to be attached to the side of the head. Whereas your mother's DNA might do something and say, no, you should be detached. You need to not be connected to the side of your head. So we end up with a weird question here. Which one of these two wins? Is your DNA going to is your DNA from your father going to win and you're going to have earlobes that are attached to the side of your head? Or is your DNA from your mum going to win? Are you going to have earlobes that are free to move, that are detached? Which one's going to win? Which one's going to take over? And that's that's the big question that we're trying to get to. Why do we end up with certain traits? And of course, both of these, the only place that you could have got this information is from your parents. So that's why. Or that's what I was going to say. Or you're going to have some weird thing happen with your body. Maybe they both win. Maybe one earlobe is detached and the other earlobe is attached. How are we going to figure this out? Well, I'm going to show you in a second, but I'm going to leave this up for a little bit longer because there's a lot of text here. I'm going to quickly point out, I guess, while you guys are maybe either copying this down or something, is just to look at the word detached. Notice how I use the capital D for detached, whereas when we talked about attached, I'm going to use a lowercase d. The reason I'm doing that is because detached has the D in it, so I'm going to use capital D, but I don't want to use an A for attached. I'm just going to use a lowercase d, and you're going to see why in a second. I'm going to jump
Wait,
ahead.
so
Yep.
is there like a better like way our ears form? Like, is detached better than attached, or is attached better than detached?
Well, yeah, so that's a good question. So like, for example, with some DNA, like with some traits, obviously there are things that you want. For example, human beings have 5 fingers, okay? You know, that's on one hand. That's a trait, okay? Now that's a pretty dominant trait. You see that a lot in human beings is to make 5 fingers or 4 fingers at a time if you want to be smart ass. So you would it is possible that you could get DNA that says, don't have 6 fingers, but that's not necessarily going to be that might not necessarily be a popular thing that shows up. But I will talk about that in a second because I want to show you guys this here. Now, oh, this is a lot of text. Sorry, guys, I didn't actually review this before I gave it to you. And this is what I just said here. We use a capital D for detached because it is a dominant trait. Now, if you have any alleles with a dominant trait, then that is the trait that is expressed and shows up in a person. So if your mom gives you a gene with the dominant trait in it, if your mom gives you a dominant trait, then you'll have that trait. If your dad gives you a dominant trait, you'll have that trait. If your mom and your dad give you a dominant trait, then you're definitely going to have that trait. So dominant traits are almost more likely to occur than non-dominant traits. And yeah, the next part, of course, is to talk about what's the opposite of a dominant trait. We use lowercase d for attached earlobes. Now, attached earlobes are what we would refer to as a recessive trait. Now, a recessive trait means it will only be expressed if there are no other alleles. So if there are no other dominant traits, that's when the recessive trait wins. Now, we're actually going to do some playing around with this in a couple of seconds. So at the moment, this is really weird because we're just writing down words. We're just getting words down. But when we actually get this copy, when we actually start working on some problems with this, it'll actually make a lot more sense. Now, some quick points here. First point, dominant traits don't mean that they are better traits, okay? They don't always mean that they're better traits. Just because something's a dominant trait doesn't mean that it's better. For example, if I look at brown eyes and blue eyes, it doesn't really matter what color eyes you are. But one of those two is dominant. Brown eyes or blue eyes, one of the two of those is dominant. Doesn't mean that it's better. I'm mostly telling you guys this because we all come to school with different misconceptions. My misconceptions were, while you guys are copying this down, I'm going to ramble for a bit, if you don't mind. You can tune me out if you want. You can turn down the volume until I change the slide. But my misconceptions came from a video game. And I know that a lot of you guys love your video games, so yeah. My favorite game, well, one of my favorite games growing up was a game that is still sort of popular, but it's kind of lost its way a little bit, was Metal Gear Solid. And if you ever play the Metal Gear Solid game, they try to talk about dominant recessive traits. And they're like, oh, I'm the evil twin brother because I have all the recessive traits and you got all the dominant traits. And it's kind of like, no, that's not how it works at all. Just because you've got recessive traits doesn't mean that doesn't necessarily mean that you're weaker or inferior. It's just the recessive, like dominant or recessive traits just mean that, you know, it just so happens that this gene usually takes over. It's like I would never look at someone who's blonde and say, well, obviously you've got blonde hair, so that's just a weaker hair color. It just so happens the blonde is just a recessive trait, so it makes it a rarer hair color. Anyway, the last point here is dominant traits also don't have to be the most common trait in a population. This I only found out the other day, and I thought that, yesterday when I was looking this up. Now, I might get this wrong, but I found out this thing and I was like, what the hell? It turns out that having 6 fingers is actually a dominant trait. It's actually very, you know, if you have 6 fingers, it's actually it's a dominant trait. Your body, like if you marry someone with 6 fingers, you're very likely your child will have 6 fingers. But the problem is that even though it's a dominant trait, it doesn't mean that a lot of people have it. So therefore, you can still have a lot of recessive traits. Example would be something like blonde, something like blue eyes, I think is an example. Blue eyes are a recessive trait, and that's why not many people have blue eyes. But if you go to, I think it's like Sweden, so many people have blue eyes, and those blue-eye people have babies with blue eyes. So, you know, even though it's a recessive trait, it's still the most prevalent, it's the most common trait in the population. Now, I'm willing to answer some questions about this if you have them, but I am not an expert, so I'm not sure if I can help you out. Otherwise, I'm going to change the slide. We cool with that?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. So let's just recap. Dominant traits, these are the traits, they'll take over no matter what. Recessive traits, the recessive traits, they're like the weaklings, right? They're like the weaklings. They'll show up no matter, they'll show up, sorry. Yeah, the recessive traits, they're like the weaklings. They might show up no matter, but only if no dominant traits are presented. So let's look at our earlobe example in a little bit more detail for 1 sec. I'm going to talk about, with earlobes, there are 3 combinations. Either from your parents, you get a dominant trait from your mum and a dominant trait from your dad. Okay? You could get a dominant trait from your mum or dad and get a non-dominant trait or a recessive trait from your mum and dad. Or you could get 2 recessive traits, 1 recessive trait from your mum and 1 recessive trait from your dad. Here's the question, right? If I get the dominant detached earlobe trait from mum and I get the dominant detached earlobe trait from dad, what do you think the earlobes are going to be? Detached or attached?
Wait, say the question again.
Detached.
Okay, listen carefully, Alethea. If I get a detached dominant trait from mum and a detached dominant trait from dad, what do you think my ears are going to be?
Detached.
Yeah, detached. Both of these are detached, so therefore you are going to have the detached earlobe, the A example. Let's look at the other one. If you get a recessive trait from your dad, so the unattached ear, the attached earlobe from your dad, and then the attached earlobe from your mum, what type of ear do you think you're going to have?
Detached.
What was that, David? Attached or detached?
Detached.
No, not
Wait,
detached.
what? Oh,
Why
Oh,
did you get either? Like,
either. Good guess, but no. If you've gotten the lowercase d from both of your parents, then your earlobes will be attached.
I thought you were.
oh
talking
wait, I
about
thought you meant the
one.
middle one. Yeah,
Yeah, I
same.
thought it was the middle
I
one.
was just talking
Oh,
about the middle
sorry,
one.
David. Sorry, Lethea. I apologize. I wanted to do the middle one last because I wanted to build up to the middle one. I'm sorry. Let's do the middle one now. David, you said detached. Alethea, you said you weren't sure. It could be either. In this case, it would be, and it will always be, detached. And the reason's because it's got this D here. This is a dominant D. So because this is a dominant D, it's a big, like, you know, muscly D. That's a weird arm. I'm trying to draw like an arm sort of thing here with like huge muscles. Because this is a dominant D, it's going to crush this lowercase d. So it's going to mean it turns out that it is detached. Okay? So yeah, both of these are detached. Only this one here is attached. And that means that this is a recessive trait. Now, I will say it doesn't always mean it's not common, but I will say usually, now this sort of goes back on what I was saying before. I said before, sorry, really quickly, I said dominant traits don't have to be the most common traits in the population. But dominant traits usually are the most common expression. My earlobes are detached. They are free to flop around. And it makes it really easy to put earrings in, but I haven't got earrings. But yeah, if you're sitting there and you have just played with your earlobes and you realize your earlobes are attached to your head, then you're a rare breed. You have 2 recessive genes in your body. That's something very rare for you. Okay? Some technical terms here. When both are the same, we say this is a homozygous or purebred. So this one here, the top, this is homozygous because they're both uppercase D. This one here is also homozygous because they're both lowercase d. They call this pure breeding. I think that's because they can only give one type of DNA. Like to their children, they can either give the capital D or the capital D. They can't give any other type to their children. The other type is called heterozygous. And that's like a hybrid. Now, if you reckon that you're gonna struggle to remember these, just remember.
I always hear that with wolves.
What was that?
I always hear like hybrid in like movies, like wolves and like stuff.
Yeah. So a hybrid. What a hybrid means is hybrid comes from the word cross between. So if you talk about like a wolf hybrid, then that's like going to be part wolf, part something else. In this hybrid at the top, we've got half dominant, half not dominant. In a hybrid car, you have half electric, half petrol. That's why we use the word hybrid for. Now, if you're going to get confused between homozygous and heterozygous, I guess one of the ways you can think about it is, and I don't like this, but I know that you guys are going to remember it, so I'm going to teach it to you anyway. You think about a homosexual is when a man falls in love with another man. They are the same sex. And that's the thing. That's what the word homo means. The word homo means same. So when we've got D and D, that they're the same. Lowercase d, they are the same. Homozygous means same. Heterozygous means different. Hybrid. Heterosexual means someone that's a man that loves the opposite sex, or a woman that loves a man. Heterochromatism is when they are so I'm just trying to think of some other examples. I think we talked about homologous. Homologous pairs are when you have 2 pairs that are the same. Homologous, homozygous. Homo is like I think it's a Latin prefix. We don't use it very much, but yeah, whenever you see the word homo, it usually means 2 things are somehow the same. I'm going to change the slide now. You guys can come back to this later on if you want. We're going to just jump on to the next little bit. We're going to look at a family tree. Let's take this particular person. Now, this particular person has a lowercase d and a lowercase d. Because they've got 2 recessive traits, that means that this person's earlobes are attached. Now, if I was to then say, look at this person's parents. Let's say their mum has a lowercase d and a lowercase d. That means that her earlobes are going to be detached. But the dad, we don't know about what the dad is. Could we work out what type of earlobes the dad has based off this information?
Wait, so
Yeah.
I thought having 2 Ds would mean that it's attached.
Yeah.
Oh, yes, you
But
are
if you
right.
know, yeah,
What
say.
the F was that a say?
It means the dad has an attached earlobe.
So do you think, okay, if the dad has an attached earlobe, then you think that it has to be this?
Yeah, lowercase d's.
Yeah. So because it gets one lowercase d from dad, one lowercase d from mum to get both lowercase d's. That's a good
Wait,
answer.
so
Yeah.
is it possible, like in a really, really rare case, that a recessive gene could take over a dominant gene?
No, the dominant gene will always win.
Wait,
But I want to.
Mr. Guru, can you explain what a recessive gene is? I don't even know what that is.
So these lowercase d's are recessive genes.
What does recessive mean, though? I don't know what that means.
So a recessive means that. Notice. Give me 1 second, okay? Because first I want to point out one thing here. If the dad had a lowercase d and a lowercase d, then that would mean that his earlobes would be attached, and that would work. But I want to point out one thing here before I start to explain what recessive is. What if that the father instead had a capital D and a lowercase d, had a dominant gene and a recessive gene? What would his earlobes be in this situation? Attached or detached?
Detached.
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 That's my family tree.
Now, would this still work? Yes, because even though
Is
the
it-
father has a detached dominant gene and a recessive detached gene or an attached gene, it is possible for him to have a daughter with a detached gene because he could just give this
That lowercase.
that allele or that copy of his DNA. Remember, for every parent, you have 2 copies of the chromosomes. Your chromosomes have 2 sides. You could give the one on the left or the one on the right. Now, Brendan, to talk about a little bit more about what the difference between detached and attached is. Between recessive and dominant. If the father has this, I'm going to do it up the top here. If the father has DD, that means one chromosome codes for detached earlobes, and one chromosome codes for, or one gene on one chromosome codes for attached earlobes. And the question becomes, well, which one wins? The idea, the one that wins is the dominant gene. The dominant gene dominates. It always wins. So because I've got a dominant gene and a recessive gene, the recessive gene loses. So therefore, the dominant gene is the one that gets expressed. Now, so in this case here, this person has a recessive gene and a recessive gene. So therefore, the recessive gene wins. This person has a recessive gene and a recessive gene. So the recessive gene wins. This person has a dominant gene and a recessive gene. And if it's got a dominant gene always wins. Does that make a little bit more sense, Brendan?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of understood everything. I just didn't know what the meaning of recessive is.
Oh, okay. So recessive, sorry about that. I went back over. Maybe this helps someone else. If you didn't know, recessive gene just means the gene that loses. Now,
Okay.
I want to do I wanted to do one last sort of little thing here, just because I can. And I wanted to go through this with you guys because I thought this might be interesting. I've actually never done this before. This is something that you guys now, blue and brown eyes. I've mentioned this twice during the presentation, so it's time to talk about it. Blue and brown eyes are dominant and recessive. Brown eyes, or capital B for brown, are dominant. So that means if you have a dominant B and a dominant B, you're going to have brown eyes.
Wait,
If
sir.
Yep.
What happens if like your child like has like different eye colors? Like one eye is brown and the other is a different color.
Oh, that would be cool. Oh, that's crazy. That'd actually be
Dichroism,
cool.
yeah, that's a mutation that's occurred somewhere. So that might be like that mutation might be caused by genetics, or it might be caused by something weird going on with your DNA where the genes just are out of order. It might be something wrong with the cells in that person's eye. Maybe they're reading the wrong part of the DNA. I actually don't know enough about what causes dichroism. I think it's called dichroism. But yeah, I do know it occurs a lot in cats. I don't know much about what causes it, but yeah, it could be caused by DNA. And it has occurred in humans, though. I will point that out. It's not like, don't think that it's like, oh, it only occurs in animals. It has occurred in humans. Back to my point, though. If I have an uppercase B and uppercase B, two dominant brown genes, then I'm going to have brown eyes. If I have a dominant B and a lowercase b, well, the dominant brown eyes are going to win. I'm going to have brown eyes. Only way to get blue eyes is if you have a recessive brown gene and a recessive brown gene. Myself, me over here, if you actually look at my eyes, which would be a bit creepy, I suppose, but if you ever do like see a picture of me, you guys will find that I have two blue eyes. So that means I must have this genome here. I must have two recessive genes. My wife loves my blue eyes. She said it's one of her favorite parts. I was like, okay. I love blue eyes. I think they look really nice. I know the brown eye. I do like brown eyes too, though. Like, especially but yeah, it doesn't matter. Now, where did these blue eyes come from? Well, I must have got these blue eyes from my parents. So if I look at my parents, right? My mum has blue eyes. Can you guys tell me what's the other allele that would go here?
Lowercase.
Lowercase b.
Yeah, lowercase b.
It has to be a lowercase b, because otherwise she would have brown eyes. It has to be a lowercase b. What about my dad?
Lowercase?
It's either capital
Lowercase.
B.
Lowercase b.
It has to be lowercase b. Let me just for a second here, I want to do this. If it was an uppercase b, then my dad would only have one thing he would give me, which would be an uppercase b, which means that I would end up with brown eyes.
Brown eyes.
Therefore, the only way for my dad to give me a recessive gene is if he has a recessive gene. So that means my dad has brown eyes, and it has brown eyes with a dominant brown gene and a recessive blue gene. My dad in this case would be my dad is the hybrid. Whereas both me and my mum are the pure breeds, or again, homozygous. Whereas my dad is heterozygous. Now, speaking of my wife, I was showing her this last night. I thought I wanted to show you hers for a second, right? So my wife has her dad, so my father-in-law, has also got blue eyes. So therefore, he's got a lowercase b and a lowercase b. Now, if her dad has a lowercase b and a lowercase b, what does that mean my wife has to have?
Brown eyes.
No. Yeah. She's got brown eyes, but if
she has brown eyes. Cool. I just summed it up.
Good job.
What? I just summed it up.
But what are the gene combinations? Has she got uppercase B, lowercase b, lowercase b, uppercase B, lowercase b?
Lowercase.
Both lowercase?
No.
It just depends because her mum. We need to find out her mum first.
Well, here's the first thing, right? This is the part that I want you to see. her dad has blue eyes, lowercase b, lowercase b. There's only one thing that he can give his daughter, right?
Blue.
A lowercase b.
Case B.
Mhm.
Now, if she has a lowercase b, what must this one on the left be in order for
Capital
her to
B.
have brown eyes?
Upper, uppercase.
Capital B.
Uppercase B.
Upper.
Yeah.
My wife is a hybrid. She is a
GG's.
heterozygote.
Hybrid. That sounds so cool.
It does
Yeah,
sound
imagine
cool.
being labeled a hybrid. Like, I would want to
Like,
be
it's
labeled as a
so
hybrid.
slick.
I know. I think
That's
it's some of the words in this,
Clean.
some of these words are actually kind of cool. Like purebreds and hybrids are like, okay. Now you're right.
Well, like-
We don't know what
Wait.
we don't know what my wife's mother has. She could be giving. She has to have a dominant gene. So she's
Mhm.
either her mother. I actually don't know. She is either uppercase B, because she gave
Or
one of her
she-
uppercase B's to her daughter, or she's uppercase B, lowercase b, in which case she
But
gave.
what if she have to?
Hmm?
What if she just be? Oh, never mind. Okay, never mind. It's alright.
So she could give one of these genes to her. She could give the brown-eyed gene to her daughter, but leave the blue-eyed gene and just not give it to her. So we don't know. I don't know. You could like my wife. If my wife's sister had blue eyes, then you would say yeah, it's definitely the top one. If my wife's sister has brown eyes, so it's probably more likely that this is the case. But again, that's not necessarily certain. We just don't know. It's kind of, I find it funny that we can know for my father and my mother, even without looking at them, we can know 100%. But with my wife's mother, we just don't know. We could, if we looked at her parents, we could maybe figure it out. So my wife's grandparents. But yeah, the last little bit would be to say, well, what could my wife and I, we don't have children yet, but if we did have children, what type of children could we have?
Brown-eyed child. Probably.
No, they could either have brown eyes or blue eyes.
Blue eyes.
They could have brown eyes or blue eyes. Let's have a look here. So let's just
Wait. Capital B and lowercase b. Hmm.
So here's the trick, right? No matter what, like no matter which gene I give, if I give this front gene here, if I give that front gene, then I can give a lowercase b. Or if I give the back gene, I could give a lowercase b. It doesn't matter which one of those genes I'm going to give. I'm going to give a recessive gene. But my wife, she could give either the uppercase b,
Or lowercase.
or she could give her, and I'll do a different color. We'll go with orange. She could give her lowercase b. And those are the 4 combinations that could happen. Okay? Now, this first one, is this brown or blue?
Brown.
Brown. What about this second one?
Blue.
Blue.
What about the third one?
Brown.
Brown.
And what about the fourth one?
Blue.
Blue.
It's like a void in a pattern.
It's brown.
So there
It's
is
really
a
brown.
no. The last one's definitely blue. It's 2 recessive genes. So that means because I'm pure and she's got 1 lowercase b, there is a 50-50 chance that we'll have a blue-eyed child and a 50-50 chance that we'll have a brown-eyed child. We could even have, because like if me and my wife have 2 kids, we could have 1 child with brown eyes and 1 child with blue eyes. Or we could have 2 children with blue eyes. If you look though, really quickly, I want to point something out here. My father, if you look at this, my father and my mother were exactly the same as my father, my mother were exactly the same as me and my wife. And
Yeah, that's fact.
my mum always found it weird is that she had 3 children and each of her children had blue eyes, even though each of her children had blue eyes, even though it was a 50-50 chance. It's the same idea as saying, you know, it's a 50-50 chance whether it's a boy or a girl, it's a 50-50 chance. Now, I will point this out in the very bottom. This is a bit of a disclaimer. There are multiple genes coding for eye color. This is a simplified idea, okay? This is not necessarily 100% true. If you find someone with green eyes and they say, well, my eyes are actually green, they're like, okay, fine. You might find someone that's got, well, the classic one of people that say, my eyes aren't actually brown, they're hazel. It's like, okay, sure.
What's the difference?
No, hazel's more like it's bright. It's more lighter.
Hazel is
Oh.
is a lighter brown.
Yeah.
It's still brown.
Yeah, like so it's
It's
technically
so
like
brown. I'm just like, shut up and just call
Yeah.
it brown, bro.
I know. It's kind of like, and you might get different, yeah, there are lots of genes going on here. So unlike the earlobe one where it's very clear, it's either attached or not attached, with eye color, it gets a bit murky. It gets a bit like, okay. But I find this stuff really interesting. You gotta be careful though.
oh god.
I've heard some really funny stories, well, not funny stories, actually kind of sad, of people that have taken first genetics classes at university and done this and then realized, oh my God, I'm adopted and my parents never told me. And then it gets this really awkward thing. Because if you're,
What the heck?
Yikes.
if your parents have brown eyes, if your parents have like, I don't know, what's an example? Your parents have if your parents have 2 dominant brown eyes and then they have a child which has blue eyes, that doesn't work. That's not possible. That can't happen. Even if you've got this, that can't happen, because that means that you're saying, oh, where did this brown eye gene come from? It can't. Where did this blue eye gene come from? It can't have come from the father. So what's going on here? And so some people have found out some really weird things about maybe where they came from, where they were born, maybe who their real father is, because they've done genetics classes and been like, whoa, what the hell? So yeah, it's kind of, that's one of my points, I guess, is this. There are some combinations that aren't possible. If you have 2 dominant pairs for brown eyes, a brown eye and a blue eye, it is impossible for you to get this combination. You just can't get it. That's the same reason why we knew, like, oh, it's impossible for my father to have 2 dominant genes, because if he did, there would be no way that I could have blue eyes. Now, but that pretty much brings it into the lesson. I want to show you guys what I've got for you for homework, and then that's going to be it. The homework for you guys, I wanted to give you guys, I've been pushing you a lot with style and giving you a lot of style work. And I thought, I'm going to give you something a little bit easier to do for the next couple of days, just so that it's, you know, something that you can quick and do easily, but still related to the topic. So I'm going to show you what that is really quickly, and then I'm going to let you guys go. So what I wanted you guys to do is I've uploaded, Samir, if you're here, you need to do the attendance question. If you're not, you can't do it. Classwork, investigating inherited traits. What I've done is, how has someone already done it? Okay, David's already done it because he hasn't been, I don't know, maybe he hasn't been listening to it yet. What I want you to do, maybe he made up the answers, but is I've given you guys this Google Doc, and I've given every person a share of the Google Doc. All you have to do.
See it.
Oh yeah, sorry. Thanks, Felicia. Glad I've got someone here. Yeah. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
So your job is to all you have to do is fill in the traits.
Oh, easy.
I told you I want to give you something easy. The other advantage is that if you guys want to meet up with your own separate Zoom afterwards, you can just like write each other's answers here. You can email each other's answers. But there is one catch. I want you to fill in the traits below, 5 other people, but you have to make sure one person is related to you somehow. That could be your brother, it could be your mom, it could be your father, it doesn't matter, but I want to know something like that. So all you have to do is like, okay, so for example, you know, you might go with something like your first name. You might go with, so then you might go with my sister. My sister's name is Steph. And so then she's my sister. And so can you roll your tongue? I can roll my tongue. Can she roll her tongue? Yes.
That's so easy.
And then, yeah, you just make your way down the list. The last question, and there's only one question here. And once
Ew,
you've
what
done,
the flip?
you can submit it. The last question is, describe one interesting thing in your data. So it might be, I thought it was weird that I was the only one that could, when they clapped their hands, their left thumb went over or something like that.
What the heck?
So when you clap your hands and you bring them together, you want to check to see if your left thumb is over the top of your right thumb. For me, it's my left thumb, but for you, it might be your right thumb.
Wait, how
so
do we
what
get on
if-
this stuff?
What if your hands like align perfectly and then they're just
Yeah,
both,
no, that's what I was gonna say.
What do you mean align
Yeah.
perfectly? You want to make
as
sure
in like one doesn't go over the other.
Oh, my
Oh.
left thumb's over my right.
Okay, that's, yeah. If maybe if it doesn't work, then you might say, like when I clap my hands, the natural position is they're equal. But yeah, I think so. I don't know which. For these ones, I'm not sure which one's dominant. I think freckles are a dominant trait. I'm not sure. I know my wife has freckles, but I'm not sure about everyone else.
Must be nice.
So,
Wait, what?
Is that her name?
no, her name's Louise. Yeah.
Ah, I thought it was like
Wait, Mr. Gray, why isn't there an option for like ambidextrous people?
Ambidextrous people. Well, I guess there isn't an option for ambidextrous. You're right, but when you say right-handed, I would say right-handed or left-handed. I'd say what's their most dominant hand? Like, as in, if you're ambidextrous, one of your hands might be dominant, or you might go, what hand did you learn to write with first? So did you learn to write with your right hand first or your left hand? I was definitely right-handed, but yeah.
Wait, so if my whole family members, because everyone in my family are right-handed people, and I'm the only one that can write left and right-handed.
Okay, well,
you
Brendan,
can write with both.
did you learn, when you first learned, did you learn left-handed or right-handed?
When I picked up a pen, I always pick it up with my left.
Okay. In that case, then I would say, in that case, I would say again, it could be a recessive trait. This could be a trait that has gone from, it could be a recessive trait that's been passed down from a couple of generations, or it could mean that you're
Is that
adopted.
like with sickness? Is that like sickness? Is that like with sickness? Like you could like if you're the only one in the family that has that specific sickness.
So yeah,
But like they ask,
let me
but
show
like,
you.
do you know how the doctor asks you? Okay, show us.
So sometimes I have to ask you, like, what's going on here? So let's just say, let's pretend that this is, Brendan here with 2 recessive genes. Like, that means that could have come from his parents. Let's just say his parents are right-handed and right-handed. This recessive gene can go down to him. So then I'm just using as an example, Brendan, this might not be the case. Now let's just say Brendan's parents, Brendan's grandparents are also like this. Let's go up one more generation. So that means that there has been this recessive trait that has been in his family the whole time. It keeps getting passed down, but never gets the chance of being like expressed because it's always fighting against this big dominant trait. So even though, and then like for example, maybe if you went all the way up, maybe he would have, you know, a great grandfather that was a great grandmother or grandfather that was also left-handed, you know, and that's where the left-handed gene comes into the family, but then it just sticks around for 1-2 generations before it shows up again. And that's sort of how you can look at someone and be like, even one of the weird ones that I've heard when they look at babies, they go, oh wow, that baby has their grandmother's smile. It's like, yeah, well, that's because it can get passed down from generation to generation as recessive genes as well. I don't know if
So that means
yeah,
the recessive genes, yeah,
yeah,
of like I know 2 or 3 generations are passed down to me.
yeah.
Ah,
So you could, all these people right in the middle, all of these people are right-handed because all of these people have a capital R. They have a capital R, and because they have a capital R, they win. And the chance of you getting a lowercase r from your mum and a lowercase r from your dad to make this work is 1 in 4. It's it's not very unlikely, but it's a 25% chance. Do you have any siblings, Brendan?
yeah,
Are they right-handed?
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I thought. There's a 3 out of 4 chance that they'll be right-handed. Alethea, did this answer your question, or did I get lost and confused with your question?
Oh, nah, yeah, it is.
Yeah, and this stuff's always interesting because it's always like, it means that you can sort of see where certain things come from.
It's like now I know why doctors actually like, oh, is this in like, has it been like, has anyone else had the same thing?
Yeah,
Like, do you know how like if you have a sickness and doctors actually like, has anyone else in your family had the same thing?
yeah. So that's the thing. When they look at something like breast cancer, right? They'll be like, okay, if you've got a if let's just say you've got you're here, right, and you've got you're here, and you've got your mum is, hold on, give me a sec. This is your mum and this is your dad. And let's just say your mum has let's just say your mum has a sister, okay? And let's just say your sister, and that sister, your mum's sister, that would be your aunt. Now, if your aunt gets breast cancer, okay? If your aunt gets breast cancer, then that means that it is possible that that could be a recessive trait, you know? And if that was an recessive trait, then that means that it's possible for you to also get breast cancer, even if your mum doesn't get it. Let's just say that she has breast cancer, and that means she gets breast cancer, whereas your mum has the dominant trait and the recessive trait. But that means she still has this recessive trait. She still has the ability to give you the breast cancer causing gene. It just might be that it just might be that your dad then gives you also the other side of the breast code, and then you would end up with getting the same thing. I don't know. That's sort of how I think about it.
But then what happens if like none of your family has it?
Well, that's the thing, is like, if none of your family have it, then like when we talk about stuff like breast cancer, it's a bit iffy because obviously there are other causes. Remember, there are phenotypes. There are other things that can make things happen. So there might be radiation that causes it, might be a blood infection, might be just, it might be something like something in your diet that sets it off. It might be some random virus that you get that accidentally stuffs around with your DNA. So there's a lot of other things that can cause it. It's just, this is an example of where, and so then you could get breast cancer. Like, well, there's no one in my family that has breast cancer. How did this happen? There are two situations. Either one, it was recessive that goes so far back, like in the Brendan example, where it's recessive that it goes so far up that it takes 4 generations before you see it again, or maybe it's just caused by the environment rather than genetics. But it is a
Wait,
really
so
yeah.
how come what's that? Your handedness is genetic. Like, are you able to train it even though you don't have that gene?
Exactly. That's why handedness is almost a phenotype. Yes, it is sort of governed by genetics, but that doesn't mean that you have to, if you get born with a left-handed genes, it doesn't mean you have to be left-handed. You can train you can train yourself to become right-handed by putting a lot of effort in. It also says as well as like, you might naturally pick up a pen and just, for some reason, because of the shape of your hand, you're more comfortable with your left hand. Maybe you always picked it up with your left hand. So yeah, I have some problems with stuff like right-handed, left-handed, because it can be controlled a little bit by the environment, by your choice and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So that's why when Brendan's answer, I'm like, I'm not 100% sure, but this just gives me a chance to talk about recessive genes some more.
Wait, Mr. Gray, I have 2 questions.
Go.
So the one talking about breast cancer, how do girls get breast cancer if they don't have the things exposed to the sun?
Wait, what?
Because breast
You know what
cancer
I mean?
doesn't like, you're confusing breast cancer with skin cancer, Brendan. Circa. By the way, we've finished the lesson, guys. You guys know what you need to do. If you want to head off, you can. Sorry for keeping you guys longer. I just sort of also. Let's just with regards to breast cancer, though. Skin cancer occurs when UV light hits your skin, and then that causes a melanoma or a skin patch, a patch of skin to form cancerous cells. But if you've got cancer, can also just mean a tumor. Like you could just have a bunch of cells in your body that just start dividing, and not dividing because they want to divide, and they just keep dividing, and that creates something called a tumor. And that's usually when a cell gets the wrong information. It just says, instead of dying, it's usually a fault in the DNA code. It says, no, instead of dying, you don't want to die. You just want to keep replicating. And that's what it does. It keeps replicating, makes a tumor, and then that sort of can lead to, bigger tumor and breast cancer and so on and so forth. So it doesn't have to be caused by radiation from the sun. Does that answer that question?
Mm-hmm.
And that's
Wait,
And the second question is, what's the 1/4 thing? I still don't understand that 1/4 thing.
Oh, okay. The reason I said that it's 1/4 down here is because, okay, so let's just say this is your father and this is your mother, right? Then that would mean that there are 4 combinations. Either your father could give 1 or 2, or your mother could give A or B. So therefore, there are 4 combinations: 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, which means you would have R, and A is R. You would have uppercase, uppercase. You could have uppercase, lowercase. You could have lowercase, 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 or no, lowercase, uppercase, or lowercase, lowercase. In this case, you would be this one down the bottom. That's a 1 out of 4 chance. This one dominant gene, right-handed. This one, dominant gene, right-handed. This one, dominant gene, right-handed. This one, no dominant gene, left-handed. So therefore, there is a 1, 2, 3 out of 4 chance that this person will be born with right-handedness. There's only a 1 out of 4 chance that they'll be born with left-handedness. That's where the 1 out of 4 comes from.
Oh, okay.
Now, we're going to do a lot more work on this. There is actually a much easier way to do this than what I've just shown here. And that's called using Punnett squares. We're going to talk about Punnett squares maybe on Friday. So that's sort of what we're going to discuss. Brendan, do you have a Brendan Lee, do you have another question you were about to say before? Or not? Have I muted everyone by accident?
Lee.
No, maybe he's done.
No, it's still there.
Yeah, he's still here. He's muted though.
I think it doesn't. Wait.
Doesn't matter. Do you guys have any other questions? If you want to leave, you can. I'm just like, yeah. I find this stuff interesting because it's just like, but I don't understand all of it. But yeah, it's still pretty cool.
I have a
Okay.
question.
Bye.
See ya.
See ya. And thanks for answering my question.
Thank you, yeah. Thank you for answering my question.
Pleasure. You guys know what you need
Bye.
to do, so get that done. You should be nice.
Uh-huh.
Super easy.
Yeah.
So cool.
Cool. Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Sir,
Yes. Sorry. Who's that? Hello?
Worksheet.
Oh, the worksheet's on. The worksheet is on. It's if you click on. Whoopsies. If you click on Year 10 Science on the page, there are 2 places you can access it. The first place you can access it is by clicking Classwork, and you should see when you click on Classwork all the attendance questions, or maybe you won't because they may have gone. And then you should see Investigating Inherited Traits. Click on that, and then you click on the View Assignment, you click on that.
Okay.
So give that a try now, and just let me know that it works before you
Hello.
hang up. Brendan, do you have a question? You left.
I left.
I don't know. I was like asking if you had a question, and I didn't hear you.
Oh yeah. I went down to microwave some food.
Okay. That's all right.
um,
Do you have any questions?
so
or
was
you good?
the homework just that investigating inherited traits
That's
sheet?
it. Yep. I'm making sure you're caught up with the style, but you're all caught up. So that's all that I want you to do.
Oh, okay. Is it due by next class?
I've said it's due May 6th, so that's next Wednesday. Yeah, but if you can get it done before next class, that'll be good, because that'll mean that we can like talk about maybe some things. But yeah, but just as soon as you can.
Okay.
Cool. Go eat your food.
Bye,
Yeah.
sir.
Yeah. Bye, sir.
So yeah, did you find it? I don't know who
Yeah.
this you. Yep, good. You found it. Excellent. Cool. So it's just Talik that's left. Talik, if you're here, I'm going to close the meeting now. But if you've got any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you later.